Hello and welcome to Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that looks at the psychological and emotional components of endurance sports and how they impact performance. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder and coach at TEC. And on this episode, I want to talk about happiness. I want to talk about it specifically as it relates, as always, to athleticism, to our athletic identity, to how we go about pursuing our goals. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about because it's not necessarily something that comes up as a topic of conversation. As athletes, we think about how do we stay motivated, how do we stay driven, how do we reach our full potential, how do we make sure that we can do those things season after season and maintain that drive, maintain that passion. But we don't often talk about happiness. Are we happy in the pursuit of those things? And it's where that happiness comes from, and whether or not we are happy or not is something that is really important, and it's something that is really important to me because I want to make sure that I'm doing my part and doing what I can to help athletes think about their athleticism through the lens of sustainability. Is it something, like I've talked about at length on this show, that adds value to your life, that you want to come back to season after season, that you want to maintain year long as a consistent part of your life in a way that's integrated and is balanced. And so I want to talk about happiness in a few different ways. I want to break down a little bit of the science behind happiness. I've been doing some research on this in hopes to better understand how we should think about happiness in the first place, and then with that information, break down or think about how we can apply happiness to our lives as athletes. Three primary areas that are a little bit more different than we're used to talking about, things like health, well-being, general life satisfaction. So I want to extrapolate and kind of break down some of the nuance behind happiness in hopes that we can understand, or I can give you guys the tools to understand how to integrate some of these things into your athletic pursuits in a way that creates happiness, that creates more fulfillment. I'm excited to break this down. It's been something that I've been thinking about a lot, researching a lot, and it's the more I look at it, the more it seems kind of like a no-brainer. Like it's something that I should have been talking about this whole time. But again, it kind of struck me that happiness isn't something that we often necessarily integrate into the conversation when it comes to our goals and our lives as athletes. So I want to encourage you guys also to check out thomasendurancecoaching.com. As always, tons of great resources there. We have our new Teams product that we launched, so a really fantastic new software that puts the coach-athlete relationship in the palm of your hand in an approachable platform that's flexible and dynamic. So you can check out TEC Teams, again, at thomasendurancecoaching.com, as well as our blog. You can reach out to a coach there and talk about any of the things that we talk about on the podcast. So please use us as a resource. That's what we're here for, and we'd love to connect with you if we can help in any way. And enduranceminded.com. So let us know what you're thinking, how we can help, what I can tap into on this platform to be a resource to give you the tools you need. Scroll down to the bottom of enduranceminded.com. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think, what resonates, what doesn't, what can we help with. And as always, rate, subscribe, share with a friend. I am grateful for all of your support, and I continue to be grateful for those that let us know what you're thinking. Rate, subscribe, and then get the word out with your circle of friends. So thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done it so far. I greatly appreciate it. All right, so the reason that I started thinking about happiness in the first place was because of where we're at in the season. Here we are, beginning of the year, the onset of kind of early spring, and it is the time when we start thinking about our goals, or certainly we start to solidify them. We've probably already thought about what we want them to be, what we want to accomplish, But how do we get there? What's the roadmap? How does that integrate into our lives? What does that look like from an athletic identity perspective? What's our motivators, intrinsic and extrinsic? So we start to really define and refine all of these components that are going to make up what the next several months or many months of our lives look like. And when I was thinking about goal setting and what that process looks and feels like as an athlete, whether it's myself or athletes that I have the opportunity to speak with, it's we've never talked about, or it doesn't come up directly. Do these things make you happy? Is it something that is that brings joy to your life? We've talked about that in roundabout ways, and we've certainly talked about on this podcast that we should lead with joy, and that should be the thing that drives us. And then if we lead with that, then so much of the other pieces will fall into place. But I want people to be happy. I want people to see the value of their athleticism, and I want them to see that that by valuing themselves and by making time for their goals, it is going to allow them to be the best versions of themselves in other areas of their lives. And when you do that, if that is the side effect or the outcome, you can't help but be happy. And so I truly believe that athleticism and our pursuits as athletes are a vessel by which we can be happier, and of course feel better, live longer, be healthier, and so on. But what struck me is that we're always looking ahead as athletes. So we set goals, we define where we want to be in the future, how fit we want to be, what we want to accomplish, whether that's a particular distance or a goal event or whatever it is. But we're always projecting out. What does the next training block look like? What does next week's workouts entail? Where am I going to be in 6 months from now, and is that going to allow me to achieve the results that I want? So we have a tendency to kind of project into the future, and what that does is it detracts potentially from our ability to be present as athletes, and that ability to be present also allows us to be engaged. And I think that that's a really important skill set. Is we have to see the value in where we're at right now. We have to say, I'm working towards this thing in the future, whether that's 6 months from now or 6 years from now. But what I'm doing right now is also important. And I can't rush that process. I need to be fully present and fully engaged in that process to get the most out of it. I can't rush through this week to get to next week. I can't rush through this month to get to next year. It's about small steps that lead to big results over time. And I know I've been guilty of that. Is trying to push ahead to kind of get through a particular time in my athletic life, just to get to another area, another goal, another level of fitness, whatever it is. And what that leads to is, from a science perspective, and I'll go into this a little bit, is it leads to fleeting happiness. We think that when we get there, so to speak, that then we'll be happy, right? When I reach a certain level of fitness, when I achieve a certain goal, when I run or ride or swim or whatever a certain distance, then I'll be satisfied. Then I'll be happy. Then my athleticism will add value to my life. Then it'll all make sense. But that's not the case, and we know that from a lot of research that's been done from psychologists, behavioral science. We know that projection into the future is not actually what brings us happiness. It's that presence and that groundedness in the moment that is going to lead to sustainable happiness. So one of the areas of research that behavioral science has brought to the forefront is this. It's a term called hedonic adaptation, or the set point that I'll put in quotes. And it's this kind of theory of happiness that, when we acquire or achieve something new, our happiness, our well-being, our satisfaction will rise. But what we see when we've tested this theory, or when behavioral scientists have tested this theory, is that it actually is fleeting. You might be happier for a few months, but it's going to return to prior levels of satisfaction or happiness. And so if we think about that through the lens of us as athletes, that's that goal projection, right? So if I just push through and train for the next 6 months for this race, when I get to that race, then that'll be the springboard that allows me to really reach my full potential, or be happy, or be satisfied with my performance, or my body, or whatever it is. And that mindset is fleeting. It doesn't last. It's not going to be the thing that actually makes you happy. And you'll slowly but surely return to kind of prior levels of happiness. And that tends to happen within, a couple of months. So that's one of the areas I was when I was researching. I came into these studies on hedonic adaptation, and it really struck me that we do so much of that as athletes. Again, we project, and here we are in April, and we say, well, all I got to do is get through X amount of time to a certain date, and then I'll be excited about my training. Then I'll have the fitness I need, quote unquote, to um, to really lean into this, athleticism, to really feel like an athlete. We see that a lot, with this idea that, I'm not an athlete now. I wouldn't define myself as an athlete, but if I get to, X point, whether that's a certain distance or speed, or, oftentimes it's kind of an arbitrary um, definition of fitness that we put on ourselves, or we kind of store away in our minds. If I get there, then I'll be an athlete. Then I can really take myself seriously. Or maybe even more, the thing that carries more weight is others will take me seriously, right? Other athletes, quote unquote. So this, again, the science tells us that that's not the case. That this groundedness, this presence, this engagement in our current, where we're at right now, is what matters most for happiness. And if we look at that through the lens of being an athlete, that is, we have to see the value in what we're doing right now, right? Where we're at, what our bodies are capable of, how we feel, what's manageable, and that's where we're at, and that has to be okay, and we have to be happy with that, and we have to understand how to find happiness in that process, even though we're pushing to. It doesn't mean we have to be lazy. Doesn't mean we can't strive. It just means that we have to understand that that point in the future is not what brings us happiness. another another area that I came across that struck me, that has parallels to our lives as athletes, is a Harvard psychologist, Tal Ben Shahar. He coined this term, the arrival fallacy, very similar to what I've just described, but I wanted to just kind of give a reference point. This arrival fallacy says that we live under the illusion, or the false hope, that once we make it, that we'll finally arrive, right? And I'll use quotes again there. He says that really that's a temporary feeling. It's a blip of happiness. The feeling doesn't last. And that doesn't even account for the inevitable highs and lows as we're pursuing that thing, right? So that's assuming that it's a straight line to success, which is not. There's these inevitable setbacks that life brings, or as athletes that we encounter through just our physiology, through injury, through whatever it is that we have to navigate as we're moving towards our goals. And so this again, just to kind of to provide, or bolster um, this idea of the arrival fallacy, this thing that when we get to this goal, when we get to this event, that'll be the thing. And when we cling to that thing, we lose happiness, or we're not as happy as we could be. So I say all this to say that, I think that it's worth talking about happiness or integrating this into the conversation, because I've realized more now in this, research that I've done, that we so often, project, we so often think about this arrival fallacy, or, this set point, to use the behavioral science term. And we may not be as present as we should or could be. We may not be as engaged as we could or should be in the process that's required to get us to these goals. And knowing that, it's going to constantly reset too. That there is no, or my hope, is that I help individuals understand that there isn't an end goal, right? That these are benchmarks along your way. That, if it's a certain level of fitness, if it's an event, a distance, whatever it is, whatever that goal is, that's a benchmark. It's a high point that we leverage to enrich that process, to make that athletic experience, that journey, more fulfilling. But it's not the end goal. So when we get there, it resets, and we have to find happiness in that next process. What does it look like after that goal? And so that's why it's so important too to be engaged and be present, because that we always are going to come back to the process. We're going to come back to the things that are going to lead up to a goal in the future. So I want to break down happiness in three different areas, in hopes to give you guys some kind of concrete examples of areas we can look at that might help us, or hopefully will help us, identify and find happiness in this process, and hopefully allow us to come back off of this set point a little bit, so that we can define it, we can put it on the calendar, we can put it out there, but we're not rushing to get there, in a sense, right? We're not trying to plow through the necessary steps for where we're at now to get there, and again, leading to the inability to be present in that process, the inability to be engaged and get the most out of those experiences. So the three areas are health, well-being, and general life satisfaction. And I'll give credit to Brad Stulberg. The Practice of Groundedness, his newest book, is a book that I'm now using as a reference book. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But he outlines these three areas. So, and I see such correlations between this, and he's not speaking specifically to athletics, but I see such correlations that I wanted to use those three areas and expand upon them through the lens of being an athlete or athleticism. So the first one, health. I guess I'll back up a little bit to say I realize these are classic, not classic language we would use to talk about our happiness as athletes, right? I think traditionally we would talk about, or maybe most common would be, if you ask an athlete, what areas in your athleticism are you most happy with? We would say, fitness. We might talk about nutrition. We might talk about specific metrics, pace, power. We might talk about race results. We might talk about goals met. Those are all fine things. But I purposely wanted to use these three areas, again, health, well-being, life satisfaction, to help illustrate the opportunity for nuance here, and the opportunity to expand the conversation. Because again, like I've talked about at length on the show, our goals as athletes should be integrated into our lives, right? It is not, here I am as an athlete, right, in one bubble or one camp, and then everything else happens in my life is in this other area, right? That's not sustainable. It needs to be integrated. So these three areas that I'm going to outline are a more integrated approach, and we're going to look at them as always, through the lens of athleticism. So the first one is health, right? And then, so the first place to think about that might be, what's our overall health? We chase, and I'll put this in quotes, but we chase fitness a lot as athletes, and fitness is a great thing to set our sights on, right? Specifically, aerobic capacity, muscular endurance. There are opportunities to define and refine what that fitness actually is. That's certainly a catch-all phrase, but we do need to be more fit, right? That's the goal. Um, and but those don't necessarily, or when we use that term fitness, it doesn't necessarily capture overall health. And what I mean by that is, um, what's our mental and emotional health, right? Are we pursuing our goals as athletes at all cost? And is that damaging to our mental and emotional well-being? That's certainly the case, oftentimes, and more so, or the likelihood that that occurs gets even higher with the more driven we are, right? The more we push, the more we put blinders on, the more we pursue these goals at all costs. So often we see that correlate to mental and emotional duress. So are we good there? So let's think about, again, overall health. Nutrition is certainly a big part of that, right? Do we feel, are we happy? Are we satisfied when we eat? Is that a stressful situation? Is that a stressful time in our lives, or is that something that's nourishing? Again, mentally, emotionally, as well as physically. What's our relationship with food? Are our relationships balanced, right? Is our relationship to our athleticism, to our goals, in balance with the relationships we need to maintain in other areas of our lives? That could be our career, could certainly be our family, friends, and so on. So these are all part of the kind of overall health pie, and those things need to be in check. And when they are in check, we will be happier, right? When we have balanced relationships, when we feel good about our ability to fuel our bodies, when we feel comfortable and confident in our own skin, that's going to make us happier. So thinking about overall health. And again, maybe that's just an expansion of kind of this term fitness that we use a lot. Are we fit in all areas of our lives? And that might be a good way to look at overall health. Thinking about health as through the lens of what does your body need? That changes a lot as we move through the year as athletes, right? And it's what does our body need from a physical perspective, right? So training stimulus, from a fueling perspective, but also what does our body need from a rest perspective? What does it need from from a downtime perspective, from a balance perspective? Those things shift. We have a tendency to kind of apply an approach as athletes, and we stick with that to the bitter end when it needs to be more fluid. So stepping back and understanding or realizing when that approach might need to shift or change by asking, what does our body need? And again, it could be physically, but it could also be, more, it could be more nuanced than that, or maybe tapping into some softer sciences to understand what our body needs in order to maintain balance. And then overall health through the lens of always focusing on the long term. So again, I've talked about this at length, but I really just the only way that athleticism and the pursuit of our goals um, adds value to our lives, or that we're able to get the most out of those experiences, is if we do it for longer periods of time. If we become lifelong athletes, if we begin to understand the true value of consistent dedication to becoming the best versions of ourselves year after year after year. So in the health camp is going to be, are we doing things that are sustainable for the long term? because that's going to create happiness, right? Boom and bust um, is not is not the way to go about being happy as an athlete, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, t- going for 12 weeks or 16 weeks, going all in, throwing everything else to the side, you know, with a with a dedication and focus to that goal that pushes everything else to the periphery. And then when we get to that goal, we're so exhausted and spent that we can't keep pursuing that thing, right? We have to go back to these other areas of our lives because we've sacrificed so much. That's not it's not a happy way to go about things, and it's not sustainable. It's not fulfilling. Um, and but we see that happen a lot. So are we focused on the long term? That's the a big piece of the health component for me. Number three, or I'm sorry, number two, or the second area is going to be well being. So what we again breaking some of this apart, you know, well-being of course could be, am I physically well? Do I feel healthy? um, do I, am I sleeping? Am I able to, is my appetite appropriate? Do I feel well nourished? Do I feel well supported? Do I have, people around me? Do I have a team in place that that's supporting my goals? But it's also going to be, again, is your approach adding value? So at the risk of, sounding like a broken record, it has to be something that is the pursuit of that thing makes you happy, right? Do you look at your training schedule? Do you look at your workouts? Do you look at the things it's going to require to get you to your goal? And are you excited about them generally? Or does it feel like a chore? Is it a job? Do you cringe to think about the work that's going to be required? And it's not that every day is easy. It's not that it doesn't require some, a push every now and again. It's not that it doesn't require some hard days when we might not want to show up. But again, on the whole, is that, is the approach adding value? Are we generally excited? Are we happy um, about what it's going to require to reach our full potential as athletes? Does it feel sustainable? So the way I think about sustainability is, or some of the metrics and tools I use to think about sustainability are things like, mood, motivation, contentment, happiness, right? Checking in with yourself on a daily basis and asking yourself, how do I feel about these things, right? What's my mood? Again, what's my motivation? What's my contentment, happiness? Some of these areas to say, you know, what we should be seeing is that generally the majority of these days, your mood should be good, your motivation should be pretty high, you should feel content, you should feel, satisfied, you should feel happy that you have the opportunity to pursue this goal, to check in with your body, to push yourself, to uncover what your body is capable of. And so that for me, if those things are not in check, um, then that's not sustainable, right? If week after week, or honestly even like day after day, um, we our mood is poor, motivation's low, we're not happy, we're not satisfied, we're not content. I mean, how long can we put up with that? We might be able to stick it out for a long time, but it's going to be at the detriment of, you know our goals as athletes, and really even at the detriment of those around us, right? We're not going to be able to show up for the people that need us, and we're not going to be able to show up in other areas of our lives. So, I think so much of the well-being piece is the real ability to check in with yourself and to be honest. We're really guilty of this, or certainly I have been as athletes, is when we do check in with ourselves, we lie. We say, okay, well, what's my motivation? And if you're really honest, you'd say it's very low, but or we feel like it always needs to be high. So we say, it's high, it's good. I can motivate. What's my mood, right? Well, we feel guilty. We say, I should be excited. I should be excited to tap into this thing, but I'm not. But we lie, right? We feel guilty. So that's a skill set that has to be developed. But the ability to really tap in and be honest, and it's something that takes practice. And I think it's a daily practice. It's what I try to do is really check in the morning, in the evening, whenever it makes sense, and and give yourself the opportunity to be honest and ask yourself, again, what's my mood, my motivation, my happiness, my contentment, satisfaction, however you want to classify those things, um, and keep track of them. And if they skew negative for too long, then that is impacting your well-being, right? The classification that we're using um, is, and that's not sustainable. So again, well-being is another area that if we look at that critically, I think that will help us be happier. Right. So that's what we're trying um, to to remember to be. That's what we're trying to get at is, uh, what role does happiness play in my life as an athlete, and overall well-being is certainly an area where we should check into. And if we can understand how to go about that the right way, if we can be honest with ourselves, um, and our well-being is high, then we're going to be happier. But we sacrifice that a lot. We sacrifice our overall well-being for our goals, and that's when it's not sustainable. That's when it doesn't make us happy. Number three, the third area that we can look at, or maybe should look at, to understand if what role happiness plays in our lives is life satisfaction. So this is one, of course, general life satisfaction. We could go a lot of different ways with this. Of course, I'm going to look at it through the lens of our athleticism. But one of the areas that struck me, again, reading Brad Solberg's book, The Practice of Groundedness, thinking about how to apply these tools, this research, these findings to our lives as athletes. Life satisfaction, when I read that, I immediately went to goals. And specifically, I went to, are are we satisfied with our goals? So often we choose our goals for different reasons, and they might not be because they make us happy. In terms of, when we think about pursuing that goal, when we think about accomplishing that goal, it doesn't necessarily make us happy. It might be because our peer group signed up for that thing, or our peer group is pursuing that goal. Um, it might be because of proximity, right? See this happen a lot. You have an event that's close to us, seems like the right thing to do because it's easy to get to. You feel like you need an event on the calendar. You feel like you need something to push towards. So we sign up for that thing. When we're not really vested, um, we have no vested interest in that thing to begin with. So we force it. And then we're not satisfied, right? So that really sets off a cascading. If we come at a goal with any sort of, scenario like I just outlined, that's certainly not sustainable. We're not going to enjoy the process. We're not going to be able to be engaged and present, and get the value and benefit out of that experience from the start. So that can be a broken system out of the gate. So thought about, again, when we think about satisfaction, are we satisfied with our goals? Are we picking the goals for the right reasons? And are we giving ourselves the opportunity, again, if we go back to the well-being piece, are we giving ourselves the opportunity to be honest with ourselves to pick the right goals? What's going to be motivating? What's going to be exciting? What do I want to do? How do I want to get the most out of my body? What types of training would I like to do to tap into my athleticism, right? Maybe I've been a cyclist, but I don't feel like I have the ability, or I can't be honest with myself to say, it would actually be exciting to explore what another discipline looks like, running, swimming, hiking, whatever it is. Um, we have a tendency to kind of corral ourselves, and we do things because that's what we've done before. So just certainly give yourself the opportunity to think about, am I satisfied with this goal? Is this something I even want? And if the answer is no, take a step back and do something that feels fulfilling. um, you know, I'd say I think the easiest way to think about this is when you think about that goal, are you excited about it? Now, I realize there's some mixed emotions and feelings that can go into that. When we set big goals, there can also be, and maybe even should be, fear, hesitation. There's some other feelings that are in the mix for sure. That's healthy, right? When we set big goals, there should be a little piece of fear in there, right? The real opportunity for failure is actually what can drive us to be the best versions of ourselves. But if we are able to know that that's a piece of the equation and not let that take over too much, are we excited? Does it excite you to think about that process, to think about what it's going to feel like to really lean into to what it's going to take to get there? That should be exciting. And if you're not excited, that would probably be the first indication that we should step back and think about how we can choose goals that lead to greater life satisfaction. And then another area for the life satisfaction piece is, do you have the support that you need? When we go at these things solo, when we, again, kind of corral ourselves, or we siphon off or funnel, our goals as athletes uh, separately from who we are in the rest of our lives, in the rest of our day, the other goals that we have in our lives, that can be pretty isolating. So I'm a big believer in having a support network, right? Um, it takes a village to get you to this goal. It takes a village to support your endeavors as an athlete year after year. Now, it doesn't have to be extensive necessarily, but certainly, buy-in and support from your family. They see the value in what you're doing. Now, maybe that means that your family is also engaged in these activities as well, or maybe they just understand that when you set aside time for this thing, it makes you a better person overall, right? It makes you more engaged, more present in your ability to be, a parent, a partner, whatever that that relationship is. But you need that support, right? And from my perspective, that's a coach, that's a dietitian, maybe it's physical therapist, massage therapist. You need the support of your family. It really is a pretty comprehensive network. But what that's going to allow you to do is be more satisfied in your process. You're going to feel less isolated. You're going to feel more engaged. Because you have the support of others, right? Anytime we go at things that are hard and are challenging, we need support. And then maybe to that end, we need to know how and when to ask for support. Um, you know, Specifically with endurance sports, they can be so isolating because they're so often solo, right? We do all of the work by ourselves until we get to an event, until we get to like a mass start opportunity, and that can be lonely. So that support network is even more important in that process, because we don't want to be isolated. We want to know where we can turn for support. And again, that's going to help us with our overall satisfaction. We're not going to feel isolated. We're not going to feel, when we do feel scared and nervous about setting big goals, we're going to have somebody to turn to, or have several people to turn to help us understand how to compartmentalize those feelings and process them, and move forward. So, um, just to recap, three areas that we can look for happiness in our lives as athletes. So, health, specifically overall health, Again, what does your body need? Always focus on the long term, making sure that we tap in um, to not just the fitness component, not just our discipline specific preparation, but our overall health and well being. And that's going to help us be happier and help us have a more enjoyable process. Next is going to be well being. So, you know, is our approach adding value? Does it feel sustainable? Being honest with ourselves when we check into, our mood, our motivation, our contentment, our happiness. That's going to be the well-being piece. When that's in place, when it's fully well-rounded and fully fleshed out, that's going to help us be happier as athletes. And then life satisfaction. So again, are we happy with how our athletic goals, how our athletic identity is integrated into our life as a whole? If we break that down a little more, are we excited about our goals? That's going to help us maintain happiness. And do we have the support network to keep us on track, to help us feel supported when we are in pursuit of those goals? That's going to deliver more happiness as well. So I hope this was helpful. Again, it's a conversation that once I started down this path seemed like something that we should be talking about all the time. Are we happy? Are we happy as athletes? But it doesn't come up that much, and so I wanted to take this opportunity to help our listeners maybe understand how to think about happiness through the lens of athleticism. So I hope this was helpful. As always, enduranceminded.com. And let us know what you think, how we can help, what's on your mind, what resonates, what doesn't. Go to enduranceminded.com, scroll to the bottom, and leave us a note and let us know. Let us know how we can help, what you're struggling with, where you've had your wins, where you've had your losses. I'd love to hear from you. And thomasendurancecoaching.com as well for resources to tap into our coach network, to check out our services. Again, TEC Teams, new exciting product that we have, and a really fun, flexible, dynamic coach-athlete experience in a package that's accessible to everyone. So I hope you'll check that out at thomasendurancecoaching.com. And until then, I'll see you next time.